Hey man, you guys can take a seat. You guys doing good this morning? You're looking good. Well, my name's Mike. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm excited to be here this morning, this Christmas season. I don't know about you guys, but Christmas season is in full swing at my house. And I actually did something new this year, something different than I've ever done before. I put lights on my house in November on a warm Saturday. Yeah, instead of waiting till December when it was about 20 degrees outside and snowing a little. It was amazing. I could feel my fingers the whole time, and I didn't spend the process terrified I was going to slide off my roof, Clark Griswold style, and just break every bone in my body and have to lay there until someone found me. And if I was smart, I would do it like that every year. But the truth is, I only did it because my family was out of town and I was bored. And there's an 80% chance next year I'm going to do it in the cold and snow again, because that's how I learned to do it from my dad. And Christmas is a season for following traditions, no matter how weird or stupid they are. I bet if we compared notes between all of us in this room, we could come up with a pretty crazy list of traditions, some that we love and some that we're embarrassed by. And if we talked about our experience of Christmas as adults, we might have a whole variety of different perspectives. But I'm willing to guess that if we talked about our experience of Christmas as children, we'd have a whole lot of overlap. Specifically, one of the major themes would be just the agonizing, painful waiting. That sense that Christmas just isn't coming fast enough. I mean, we need it to be here sooner. And there's different ways of waiting and going through that process. Maybe your family does the calendars with the little chocolates in them, or a chalkboard with a countdown on it. My family growing up always made chains out of red and green construction paper, and we'd tear off one chain every day to count down the days to the 25th. And it was just a way of experiencing that weight. And as a kid, do you remember, like, it was all consuming. I'm convinced, like, for adults, December is the fastest month of the year because there's crazy busy, so much to do. It feels like it flies by. But for kids, it's excruciatingly long. And it's funny to watch. We did the construction paper chain thing with our kids this year, and a couple nights ago, one of my 5-year-old twins decided that Christmas was just not coming fast enough, and so he came up with a brilliant plan, and he declared, "I'm going to tear off 2 chains tonight." And his dream was crushed immediately by his 7-year-old sister, who told him matter-of-factly, "Tommy, that will not make Christmas come any faster. It will just make you the idiot with a too small chain." She's a real sweetheart. But like, seeing that made me wonder, how many of us in life and faith, in the middle of all the brokenness and loss that we experience, how many of us feel like Tommy sometimes? Like, I just can't stand to wait any longer. How do I tear these chains off faster? The chains of my pain and my frustration and my hopelessness. Like, how long do I have to wait before life isn't this way anymore? Before I can get a sense that somewhere, someday, hope is real and alive. I know Christmas is supposed to be this season of hope and joy, but I think for a lot of us it's a pretty thin veneer. Because beneath the surface, if you can dig past the reindeer and elves and candy canes and trees and cookies and lights, we are weary. We look out at a messed up world and we look at the imperfections in our own lives, and our hope starts to flicker out. Like it's a candle down at the bottom of the wick, and we are just not sure how much we've got left. And I know there are a lot of us in this morning in that space. And those of us who aren't there, we have been. We all understand what it's like to be broken and frustrated and waiting for something. Just wondering if God remembers that we exist, wondering if he hears us at all, wondering if he really cares, or maybe if he just forgot about us. And our bad day that turned into a bad week, that turned into a bad season, is never going to end. And we're just hoping in vain, and we're fools. And I want you to know this morning, if you've ever wondered that, you're not alone. We're not the first people in the history of the world to think those thoughts, to ever wonder if hope is worth holding on to. Almost smack dab in the middle of the Bible is Psalm 88. And it's written as a song to be sung by a group of people, kind of like we just sang a few minutes ago. And it was penned by a guy named He-Man. I know what you're thinking. And the answer is yes, same guy. Fought Skeletor in his fur Speedo by day, wrote depressing songs by night. So there you go. Just kidding, different guy. He may have owned that outfit. These aren't the kind of things that we can know, but he wrote Psalm 88, and it is the most hopeless chapter in the entire Bible. And I want to read part of it for you this morning. In verse 3, He-Man says, I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. Verse 14, he writes, Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. And this is how he closes. This is the last verse. And David, even in David's worst moments, even in David's greatest expressions of hopelessness, always closed his songs with, but God, I still trust. But I still hope in you. This is how He-Man finishes. You have taken from me, friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Darkness is my closest friend, period. End prayer. Sometimes I feel guilty even reading Psalm 88, let alone praying it, like speaking those words to God, because a Christian is never supposed to feel like darkness is their closest friend. We're never supposed to be out of hope. We're always supposed to believe and have complete, full, 100% confidence that God is going to show up, right? Right? Well, check it out. Psalm 88 is actually one of the worship songs that the Hebrew people used regularly in the temple. I mean, pause for a second and imagine that. Imagine that you show up here on a Sunday morning and that's the song we're singing. We're just like, hello, darkness, my best friend. I've come to talk with you again. Because God, you really wrecked my life. Stab me in the back with a knife. I don't think you care. Pretty sure you're not there. Amen. That was powerful. Take your seats. Like that's what they did in the temple. And the cool part about that is this isn't just like a song that they sang sometimes that like some random depressed guy wrote down. This is a song that was inspired by God. We know that. This whole book that we call the Bible is God's self-revelation. And in his letter to Timothy, Paul tells us all of it is God-breathed. And here's what's mind-blowing to me about that, what I think is so cool. The breath and inspiration of God turned He-Man's suffering into words on a page so that billions of people across thousands of years could grasp something. God is working while we are waiting. He sees us. He knows our pain. He understands that this busted world we're living in leaves us feeling like our lives are splintered sometimes. And He knows. He knows in the middle of it all, when what we've got is so much less than what we hoped for. He knows that sometimes we find ourselves on the edge of despair, doubting whether He really cares and whether He's really listening. And He's okay with us being honest about that. He's not afraid of us telling Him how we feel. That's why Psalm 88 is in the Bible, because wondering and agonizing and feeling frustrated are a part of real life. And questioning why God seems so silent and so absent is a part of real faith. And it's interesting, that dynamic, wondering and waiting and waiting and waiting and feeling like God was nowhere to be found, is actually the thing that sparked the very first Christmas. You guys may know this, or it may be new information, but for generations and generations, there were always a group of Jewish people who waited every single day for the arrival of the Messiah, the one that God had promised would come and save the world. For centuries, they waited and obeyed, believing that tomorrow might finally be the day. But unlike the certainty of our Christmas, we know it's coming in a couple weeks, for a whole lot of them, it never came. They hoped and they lived and they died and the Messiah didn't show up, and then the next generation took over and faithfully hoped beyond all hope, believed beyond all belief that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be the day. And this morning, as we continue this series about the thrill of hope, I want to introduce you to a couple of those people. Their names are Zechariah and Elizabeth, and we find their story in Luke chapter 1. So if you have a Bible or a Bible with you, you can open it up to Luke 1 this morning. If you find Mark, keep going. If you find John, go back. If you don't have one, don't worry, we're going to put the words up on the screen. And if you need a Bible, please take one from the Next Steps table before you go. They're free. They're our gift to you. We're going to pick up their story in verse 5. But one of the things I love so much about this story is that I think for any of us who've ever felt pain and frustration in waiting on God, their story in many ways is our story. And this is what Luke writes about them. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. Okay, so right off the bat, Luke lets us know these two are preachers' kids, like their dads and their grandparents and their great-grandparents. And not only did they come from a long line of religious leaders, Zechariah's a priest. And they are living their lives aimed in God's direction. They are doing it right. Luke goes so far as to say they were blameless in all of the Lord's commands. And if you've ever read the Old Testament, you know that's a lot. This is a big old list to be blameless and following all of God's commands. And what blows my mind about the fact that they did that is that they're living this way. They're committing their lives to this direction based on promises that had been made thousands of years before they were even born. Despite the fact that for the last 400 years at least, God has seemingly done nothing for the nation of Israel. To an outside observer, it appears that God went radio silent on his people and completely abandoned them. And here they are, Zechariah and Elizabeth and a handful of others, still chasing after him, still hoping, living like, hey, we don't know when, but Christmas is coming. Someday Christmas is coming, and they're dedicating their lives to this ministry. So how's it working out for them? Well, Luke tells us in the next verse, so, but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. So they've been waiting, and they've been serving, and they've been aiming their lives in God's direction, and he rewards that faithfulness by not giving them an heir, which in their society was a disgrace, and the woman always got blamed because they didn't understand the science of it like we understand it now. They just believed that any woman who couldn't have children was cursed by God because of some sin in her life. We have this woman, Elizabeth, who we know later on in the story hoped for a child and prayed for a child and asked for a child and waited for a child. And she's chasing Jesus, but living her life under this massive cloud of shame because it never happened. And now it can't. She's old, he's old. That dream is dead. Yet still she has faith. Still the two of them are serving God. And it's crazy, but that faith is built on a thousands-year-old promise to a guy named Abraham. And this is like Old Testament 101. But God one time showed up in Abraham's life and he said, hey, listen, I'm going to make you a great nation. And all the people of the world are going to be blessed through you. Like every tribe, every tongue, every nation, the whole world is going to receive blessing through you. And this is the reason the Jews believed there was something extra and something special about Israel because God had made this promise. And if you've ever read the story, you know at one point it looked like that promise was coming true. Abraham had a son who had a bunch of sons, and they went to Egypt and became this powerful nation. And then they left and they took over the promised land God had given them. And David built a kingdom, and Solomon expanded that kingdom in area and in wealth. And it looked like, okay, it's happening. This is how God is going to bless the whole world through the people of Israel. And then it fell apart, like completely. There were wars and there were evil kings. Between the time of Solomon and the time of Zechariah and Elizabeth, Israel changed hands over 25 times. They got conquered by the Persians. They got conquered by the Syrians. They got conquered by the Greeks. They got conquered by the Babylonians. At one point, they got exiled. Like everybody got picked up and moved out of their homeland and resettled somewhere else for 70 years. Israel had no clout whatsoever in international affairs. It was a non-factor. They didn't have an army part of the time, half the time. And God's going to bless the whole world through these people? No, that's impossible. It can't be done. Israel was over. Hashtag Israel is over party. Right? And if anybody had any doubt left over, it was completely erased in 65 BC when Pompey, who was the greatest Roman general other than Julius Caesar, conquered Jerusalem. And he walked to the temple and he pushed past all the priests who were standing in his way and boldly walked in to a place he was not allowed to go. And he didn't get struck down for doing that. He just looked around and then left, convinced that meant Jupiter was a more powerful god than whatever god the Israelites were serving. And Zechariah was a kid when that happened. No doubt he remembered the day his dad, a priest, came home just wrecked and brokenhearted over the Roman general who had defiled the temple. And God did nothing about it. And still, even after all that, Zechariah becomes a priest. And him and his Elizabeth dedicate their lives to serving God while wondering, where is he and why is he not showing up? And why is he so silent? Why isn't he doing anything? And how in the world could he bless all the nations through Israel? We are hanging on by a thread to even still exist. And the truth is, in that era, there were Jews who bailed. They just kind of lost all hope and decided they were out on the whole thing. And I think if some of us were alive back then, we would have been tempted to join them. Tempted to whisper into the ear of Zechariah and Elizabeth, it's over. Stop hoping. This dusty little corner of the Roman Empire we call Israel doesn't matter anymore, and it never will matter again. Give up and walk away, because God, if there ever was a God, has completely abandoned us. And the thing is, if that's what we said to them in that moment, we would have been wrong. Here's what happened next. It says, once when Zechariah's division was on duty at the temple, he was serving as a priest before God. He was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. So Zechariah's in the temple all alone performing this holy ritual, which was like kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a priest. These guys did not get to do this very often, and here he is. And then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. And this is what happens every time an angel shows up in the Bible. That's why I'm suspicious of any modern story. Like, then an angel came and we snuggled. Like, I don't know. That's not a Bible angel. But anyways, Zechariah, he's really scared. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, because that's what angels always have to start with, or people are going to wet their pants. He said, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. Your prayer has been heard. You didn't think you got an answer. You didn't think God was listening, but your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He later picked up the nickname John the Baptist. Some of you have heard of him. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, because remember, a lot of them had lost hope and quit at this point. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Oh, this is such a cool moment. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be Zechariah and hear the words, your prayer has been heard. Like, as much as that message was for Zechariah in that specific moment, I think it's written down on the pages of Luke because it's for us. It's for you and me and everybody who has ever waited and hoped and wondered and prayed and figured maybe God wasn't actually listening. There are a couple of things I want us to see about hope from this story this morning, about how we can hope even though life is the way that it is. And here's the first one. Even though God is sometimes silent. God is never sitting still. Even when we don't see it, he's working. Even when we don't feel it, he's working. He's the waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, and he hears us. I just love that line. Your prayer has been heard so much. Because I think it's really easy for me to be tempted into believing that when my prayers don't get answered the way I want, on the timeline that I wanted, God must not be listening to me at all. And then I look at this story of like Zechariah and Elizabeth, and I realize they prayed for a kid in their 20s. They prayed with a little bit more urgency for a kid in their 30s. They prayed in desperation for a kid in their 40s. And maybe just for kicks, they tried praying for a kid in their 50s. And there's no way in this moment, when Zechariah is taking the incense into the temple, he believes God heard any of those prayers. But God shows up and says, I heard you. I was silent, but I wasn't sitting still. I had a plan all along. You're going to have a baby. Which is awesome, except there's a huge problem. And it's this: Zechariah was not an idiot. Like, they didn't know what we know about science today, but he knew that him and Elizabeth couldn't have a baby. That's just not a thing you can do when you're old. And he says that to the angel. He looks at him, he's like, okay, well, how can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is, wait up, is someone going to write this down? I heard they write this stuff down sometimes. I don't want people thousands of years later thinking I'm a jerk husband. My wife is not old. My wife is well along in years. She's well along in years, man. What happens next is so awesome. The angel is a little surprised that that's his response, and he looks at him and says, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news, and now you will be silent, and you will not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. This cracks me up. I love this interaction. Zechariah hears this news that he's been waiting for his whole life, and then he's like, well, we're too old. And Gabriel freaks out on him. He's like, oh, look who knows so much. Are you an angel? Are you not? Oh, no, that's right. I'm the angel. And you're going to mouth off to me and tell me that I'm wrong? You can shut right up. In fact, you can shut right up for the next 10 months until this thing happens that I told you was going to happen, because it's going to happen at the appointed time. Notice he says God has a plan for this. There is a time set aside. It's not the time Zechariah and Elizabeth have wanted for the last few decades, but it's the perfect time. It's God's moment. And this is the next thing I want us to see about how we can hope, even though life is the way that it is. Like, even though waiting is frustrating, if it's not God's time, you can't force it. When it is God's time, you can't stop it. Not even your fear and your doubt can stop it. Zechariah was afraid, and he did not believe. Like, if you just read that passage at a glance, it doesn't seem like a silly question for him to ask. Like, how can I be sure that this is true and I just eat some bad food and I'm having a weird moment in here in the temple all alone? It seems normal, but we know that it came out of a heart that didn't believe. One, because Gabriel calls it out, and two, because Luke calls it out. Luke draws a really sharp and significant and purposeful contrast between an angel visiting Zechariah in chapter 1 and an angel visiting Mary in chapter 2. See, they both have an angel show up and tell them that a miracle baby is on the way. And they both respond by asking, how? But one of them gets yelled at and the other one gets blessed. You read it and you're like, wow, did he just get an angry elf? Like, Zechariah got a grumpy angel and Mary got a nice angel, and that's rough for him. Bad luck. No, it's the same angel. It's Gabriel both times. And the response that he has is an indicator that the question how came out of different hearts. Like, both of them had doubt. But one was an open-minded doubt and one was a closed-minded doubt. Mary said, I believe, but can you explain the science to me so I know what to do? And Zechariah said, I don't believe. Let me explain the science to you. And to Mary, Gabriel said, oh, let me tell you. And to Zechariah, Gabriel said, that's how it went down. But you know what? He still got the kid. God still gave this baby John to Elizabeth and Zechariah, and I'm so grateful for that. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me, like those moments in life where I've been like waiting and praying and waiting, and I feel like God has not been answering me, I have a Zechariah mindset a whole lot more than I have a Mary mindset. Like unanswered prayers or prayers that haven't been answered the way I want, I've convinced myself why they can't happen and why they won't happen and why God will never, ever show up for me. And I realized that if my fear and my doubts determined whether God would ever show up in my life, if me being scared and me wondering how anything would ever happen and how God would answer my prayers and whether God was listening to me disqualified me from the work of God in my life, He would never show up. But thankfully, that's not how He works. When it's His time, He does His thing, despite all of our human frailty. Look at what He did for Zechariah. He told him, you're going to have a baby. And Zechariah didn't believe, so he had to walk out of the temple with the best news he'd ever received in his entire life, the news he most wanted to tell people, and he couldn't tell anybody. I can't imagine what it was like when he went home and he had to explain what happened to Elizabeth using charades. Like, can you picture that, walking in at the end of the day? Hey, honey, how was work? You saw a bird at work? What are you doing? A hungry bird? You saw a hungry bird? Good for you. It's the worst baby announcement ever. But still, God bless him because that was His plan all along, and that baby changed the world. And I think what that means for us, it's like in the middle of a shattered world where our lives are not always the way we want them to be, where what we have is so much less than what we hope for, we can still hang on to hope in the waiting. That's what faith is all about. Grant mentioned this last week as we kicked off this Thrill of Hope series. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. And the truth is, that verse is one of those ones where if we actually look at it and look at our lives, it's a bunch of baloney. It's just not true. Like if you take what that verse actually says, confident in what we hope for, and layer it over the way we're living, we're like, nope, that's not how it's working. Not for me anyway. I don't know about you guys, but I tend to have a lot more confidence in what I have than in what I hope for. Anybody else? I actually think that we can explain a whole lot of human frustration and misery and suffering by coming to the realization that we have more confidence in what we have than we do in what we hope for. For example, have you ever met anyone who's dating someone they don't like? I meet these people all the time, especially when I was in youth ministry. They're like, he's such a jerk. He's just insensitive. He never calls or texts or shows up. And all their friends are like, why don't you just break up with them? Oh, no, I love him. Like, he's never going to change. Oh, no, I can change him. You know, I can change him is basically saying, he's not what I hoped for, but he's what I have. So now I got to hope what I have becomes what I hoped for. It's a really bad cycle. Or jobs. I talk to people every week who hate their jobs. I hate my job. I hate my boss. I hate going to work. You ever think about quitting? No, I can't quit. This is the job I have. It's not the one I hope for. Or people hate their lives. I regularly talk to people who love Jesus but hate their lives because of all the pain and brokenness and frustration that's there. And sometimes you zoom out for that and you wonder, like, how, if we know Jesus, could we hate our lives? Here's how. We have more faith in the lives we have than the lives we hope for. We have more faith in the lives we have than the lives God promised us. The lives He says that we were created for. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. It's confidence that the God who holds the future in His hands is going to deliver on those promises. That's what hope is all about. And here's the crazy thing about hope. It only exists in the future. Hope can't live in the present. Regret can, but hope can't. And it doesn't exist in the present. That's the felt crisis existentialism has tried and failed to solve. Hope exists in the future. And faith is confidence in what we hope for, which means faith, being a people of faith, makes us a future-oriented people who are not defined in any moment by the pain of our present. And that sets us apart from every other living thing on this planet. You guys, there are no trees or llamas or elephants sitting around dreaming about a better future, hoping that someday they can live a better story. Like llamas are just, I don't know if you know this, but they're just going to llama until they die. It just is. But not us. Not us. We have hope that the future will be everything God promised it to be because we know that He holds the future. We know the story isn't finished being written yet, and our pain doesn't get to write the final chapter. Jesus does, so hope is real. And listen, that doesn't mean life is easy. Hope is not the absence of fear. Hope is not the absence of pain. Hope is not the absence of doubt. Hope is the antidote to fear and pain and doubt. Hope is the thing we desperately need because our lives are racked with fear and pain and doubt. Just like so many people before us, just like He-Man when he wrote Psalm 88, just like Zechariah and Elizabeth before, God showed up, but He showed up. And He came ahead of time to predict the birth of John rather than afterwards to explain the birth of John so that they would know He had a plan. He's in control. And He's the ultimate author of the future. Because that's why we can have confidence in the things that we hope for. Last thing I want us to see from the story this morning about why we can hope, even though life is the way it is this: even though what we have is not what we hope for, God is writing a story so that one day what we hope for will be what we've got. All things made right. All things made new by the one who holds the future. And so today, my hope is that everybody in this room will walk back out into the imperfections of our lives and the frustrations, the places where we're wondering and waiting and feeling like hope is beginning to flicker out, and we would know deep down in our souls that there is a hope more powerful than the darkest darkness because God is everything He ever promised us He would be. And even when it feels like He's forgotten you, even when it feels like the waiting is excruciating, He's working and He hears you and He cares and He holds the future in His hands. And I think if we believe that, it changes our perspective in the middle of our current frustrations. And it allows us not only to have this faith that is confidence in what we hope for, but it allows us to be hope dealers, to walk out into a world where hope is flickering out all over the place and point people toward the God who's worth hoping in. Will you guys pray with me? Thank you, God, for hope. We need it. We need it. Thank you for being real. Thank you for showing up in our lives. Thank you for changing everything about who we are and how we see the world. God, we live in a messed up, broken space, and our lives are imperfect. They are less than all that we hope for. But I thank you for being the God who sets all things right and makes all things new. I pray you'd fill us up with hope today so that we can walk out into a dark world and leak hope all over hopeless people. We thank you for the chance to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.